Well, the sky split and a voice thundered out in English and Farsi and Arabic and any other language as well. Return the hostages or there will be hell to pay, said Reagan 2.0. Hi, everybody. I'm here with Steve Green and Scott Ott. My name's Bill Whittle, and this particular right angle reminds me a great deal of time when I was much younger and much stupider, guys. Back in 1979, when, as Ronald Reagan was elected in 1980, during the 1980 election, we all remember that the hostages that had been held in Iran for, 444 days, I want to say, and that consumed all of our lives. That's what Nightline was originally designed as a day 63 of the hostages being held in Iran. I remember this feeling of impotence on the part of the United States. I remember the weakness that these student savages who climbed over the walls of the embassy in Iran took 52 American hostages and kept them against the will of the most powerful nation in the world while we did absolutely nothing. I was a liberal at the time, although I was never an anti-American, anti-business, or anti-military liberal. I was just a kid in the theater department who listened to other kids in the theater department, didn't know damn thing about what I was talking about. But even I was really quite impressed by the idea that these hostages that had been held for so long by Iran were on their way out of Iranian airspace as Ronald Reagan was raising his hand to become inaugurated president of the United States because they feared the consequences of a guy who seemed to be serious about using some force. So that's really what I want to concentrate on with this announcement, guys. We won't know whether or not the election of Donald Trump will cause the release of the hostages that Hamas took during their terror invasion. That's a term Steve used the week of that invasion, that horror in 2003. But I think there's a fairly good chance that it will, in fact, because when we look at the situation in Iran, who is, of course, the enabler of Hamas and is the controller of Hamas, when Donald Trump was president, Iran didn't have any money. And then when Joe Biden was elected in 2020, all of a sudden, all of these restrictions on Iran were released. And they had a lot more money. And then the Afghanistan debacle. And all this to simply say this, guys. Steve, from 1979, in a position of tremendous weakness, I remember the Desert One fiasco. But before we realized that it was a fiasco, I remember waking up and feeling like, oh, we actually made an effort to go and rescue them with their military. Yeah. I remember being really proud of that. And the thing that I remember the most, Steve, was the Iranian mullahs touring the site of that catastrophe and the reports saying that they were shaken and scared that America had actually decided to act to get our hostages back. I think the point I'm trying to make here is that no matter how many times you make this case to progressives, arguing from a position of strength is a much better place to be coming from than arguing from a position of weakness, incompetence, and the inability to make decisions.
Yeah, we've had 4 years. Well, actually, we've had 12 out of the last 16 years.
That's right.
12 years. We negotiated our foreign policy. We waged our foreign policy from positions of weakness on purpose, except where Obama would get completely reckless for reasons I will never fully understand and do things like break Libya. That's never been put back together. In an actual illegal war, Democrats love to talk about, it's an illegal war. Well, Bush went to Congress. He went to the UN. That's all the cover you need. He crossed the I's and dotted the T's. I think we're in good shape here. But Libya was an actual illegal war.
It was Hillary Clinton's chance to look tough for her upcoming election run.
Exactly. They broke a country without any blessing from Congress. They broke a country that has now become a hive of terrorism, a flood of migrants and starvation and all the rest. And by the way, they did that after, under George W. Bush, the Libyans had given up their nuclear program, which they did voluntarily. We barely even knew it existed because they were afraid of what George W. Bush might do if he found out. So
yeah, Gaddafi didn't want to find himself climbing out of a spider hole the way that Saddam Hussein did.
We looked so strong at that time that Gaddafi just, I forgot I had this nuclear program. I don't know what that's doing there. I'll just get rid of that. What do you say? We'll just pretend that never happened. Whew. Right? So that's what strength looks like. Benefits that you didn't even know were out there start to accrue. And that's a beautiful thing. This happened for that 4 years under Donald Trump when we had a decent foreign policy, when we waged our foreign policy from a position of strength.
Yep.
Take away Iran's money. Suddenly they're not up to as much bad stuff. God, we've seen so much weakness these last 4 years. The Ukraine war did not start on Trump's watch. Putin moved his troops around. He'd assemble 100,000 guys, start marching them towards Ukraine, and then he would back off. He didn't send them into Ukraine until Biden was in office.
Because Trump said to him privately during a dinner that if he did, he would strike Moscow, which is an insane thing to say, but sure complicates your targeting solution.
Yes, it does. And as Trump later said, this is pretty much an exact quote. Putin only believed me 5%, maybe 10%, but that's all you need.
That was enough.
That's all you need, especially when you're the only country in the world with long-range stealth bombers. It adds to your position of strength. And I don't want to bomb Moscow. I want Russia to join the community of Western nations and not be such an outcast anymore and not be so wedded to China. Maybe we can get there. What I do know is that things are going to change on January 20. Some of it's going to be chaotic. That's Trump's nature. It's not going to change. Deal with it. Some of it's going to be great. What I am most eager to see is how quickly things begin to turn around in places like Gaza, in places like southern Lebanon, where Hezbollah is, in places like Ukraine, in places like Iran. This is the focus of evil in the modern world, as Ronald Reagan said about the Soviet Union. This triangle between Tehran, Moscow, and Beijing, and China is too smart to get their hands very dirty. That's great. And we've got a few years to rebuild our Navy, or we need a few years to rebuild our Navy, and hopefully China will remain patient and we will avoid war. But if we could just knock a couple of those pegs out of that triangle, it's just Beijing. Trump can do that. Pray that he does.
Well, having a State Department nominee in Marco Rubio who talks about building strong alliance with India is honestly the best thing you can do with regard to China. Much better to have them looking over their back shoulder rather than looking forward out at Taiwan and thinking, hey, that looks like it's kind of a tasty morsel. Scott, this idea that we are looking at the possibility of a second Reagan is not so much the deification of Reagan and Donald Trump so much as it is that Ronald Reagan was the last president who came into office. His reputation preceded him coming into office as a person who meant what he said. I do find it interesting that both Ronald Reagan and Donald Trump have survived assassination attempts and did it with tremendous physical courage as well as a sort of a moral lightheartedness, almost a sense that you missed me kind of thing. But as when I did the Cold War series, 13-part series for Daily Wire, I spent a great deal of time on this. The Soviets ended up collapsing because Ronald Reagan said he wasn't going to give up SDI, Strategic Defense Initiative. And they knew he meant what he said because he fired the PATCO controllers. He basically grounded the air traffic control system of the country because they decided they wanted to go on strike. And Reagan said, you're not allowed to go on strike. You're a public sector union. It's against the law. Anybody who goes on strike on Monday is going to be fired. And they said, you can't possibly shut down the commercial aviation network of the United States. But Reagan did it because he said he would do it. And the Soviets looked at that and they went, oh, my God, we're dealing with a different kind of guy here. This is not a politician. You'd mentioned in our backstage show that Zelensky had made some mention. It's still very early and very tentative, but had mentioned that he might be willing to take a look at changing his position on the situation in the Ukraine. And this is telling me that the incoming presumption of strength on the part of the strongest country in the world is already sending out ripples that are modifying the status quo. And the status quo, as we come out of 2024, is not a particularly stable or happy place to be.
Yeah, and I think that the only way that President Zelensky can make a suggestion like that, which is basically, hey, we'd be willing to work out a peace agreement here if we got NATO membership. It's not NATO membership. It's the United States of America that matters here. And so being able to have the credibility of the United States of America on your side and the stalwart support of that country, of our country, is crucial. I thought it was interesting because Donald Trump actually, in his True Social post, he mixed two phrases. There's a phrase that says, all hell breaks loose, and there's another phrase that says you'll have hell to pay, and he said you'll have all hell to pay if you don't release those hostages. And that just seemed to amp up the intensity of it. And I guarantee you, there is nobody sitting in an underground tunnel in Gaza right now who's going, he probably didn't mean that. We'll be okay. I think
exactly.
They know.
Yeah, compare that with Biden saying, don't.
Yeah. So character is who you are in a sense when nobody's watching, and character is not what you say, it's what you do. And I think they understand that for all of his quirks and foibles, Donald Trump is serious about the security of the United States of America and about the security of Israel. I mean, who has done more in recent memory to foster peace in the Middle East through the Abraham Accords and other measures than Donald Trump? I mean, this is the guy who moves the U.S. Embassy, to the place where it ought to be. And so years ago, President Theodore Roosevelt was reported to have said that one should walk softly and carry a big stick. And I think people on the left especially misunderstand that word picture. The big stick isn't covered by blood and skull fragments. The big stick almost never gets used because the people know that the guy who's walking softly with the big stick is able to, that he can. And when you can, and you have the conviction of being willing to do so if your interests are threatened, then your interests don't get threatened like that. I mean, Ronald Reagan coming in, I remember, because I was among them at the time, I thought that Ronald Reagan was a crazy, sick lunatic. I was a college student at the time. And I thought, oh my goodness, this is going to be, World War III or whatever.
Yep.
But the mullahs in Iran looked at Ronald Reagan coming in and they thought, well, it's one thing to deal with this, very nice milquetoast Jimmy Carter. Who knows what this Reagan is going to do? Let's get these hostages on a plane and send them out of here. And that same kind of, it's not really a tactic. It is a way of leading that flows from the character of meaning what you say that will influence others, your allies and your enemies alike. And I pray that President Trump, who does have somewhat of a tendency to kind of flit around, and he's got my attention span basically, I hope that he is able to keep the faith in regard to this in particular, because I think the only way that these hostages get out of there and the only way that a settlement comes is when the enemies of Israel and therefore the enemies of the United States understand that the United States of America will stand and we have credibility and we have character.
Hey, Bill, can I throw something in
Sure,
that I think cuts to the heart of this?
Of
I don't know if you remember this. This was during the tanker war in 1987-88 between Iran and Iraq, part of the Gulf War there.
We went to war with Iran for about 40 hours.
Yes. Donald Trump was being, believe it or not, Newsweek Time, I can't remember which, had him on the cover in 1987 saying, the next president of the United States. This was a little bit of talk in the late 80s. And he was on 60 Minutes. He was being interviewed, I think it was by Leslie Stahl, if my memory serves. And she said, well, what would you do to make Iran stop this? And he said, I'd send the Marines in to take the island, and there's I can't remember the name of the island. It's in the Gulf, where something like 99% of Iran's oil goes through. It's Iranian territory, and bold move, but that would shut off their flow of money instantly, and Iran would have to back down. And instead of going with that, Leslie Stahl tried to trip him up by saying, "Well, which units would you send?" And doesn't know the name of a Marine Expeditionary Unit or anything like that. That's what he has generals for. But the point is, Stahl might know what Marine units there are, but she doesn't know what they're for.
Yeah,
and that's the left in a nutshell right there when it comes to showing strength on the world stage.
This is. I'm so glad you used that statement, Scott, because when you say talk softly and carry a big stick, all people hear is the big stick. They don't hear the talk softly part. It doesn't say march down the street screaming, "Look at how big my stick is, and if you mess with me, I'm going to whack you in the face and carry a big stick." It's talk softly and carry a big stick. In other words, mean what you say very little, but what you do say, mean it and back it up. And you're absolutely right. That stick is never covered with blood and gore, because if you talk softly and carry a big stick, you never have to use the stick. That's the entire purpose of deterrence. It's what makes me such a hawk. I'm a hawk because I love the idea of peace and I abhor the idea of war. That's why I am so constantly on the topic of preparedness and deterrence through the use of believable rhetoric and the force to back it up. You also said something I thought was really clever, because you're right. Those people in Hamas are not sitting there in underground tunnels thinking he probably doesn't mean it, because on the second day of Donald Trump's first administration, when ISIS was running wild and controlled most of the Middle East, and Barack Obama had said there's simply nothing we can do about it, it's a people's movement, he can't stop it, Donald Trump used the largest non-nuclear weapon in the U.S. inventory to attack an ISIS stronghold. And he did it not because that was the weapon that was best suited to it. He did it to make a point. He said, we are going to put an end to this, and we're going to put an end to this now. And he did. ISIS has disappeared in 2-3 months to mop up the entire mess. And this is what happens when you have actual power, you know how to use it. There's no point in being the most powerful nation in the world and spending what we spend on defense when being an ally of the United States means being an ally of the country that withdrew from Afghanistan under the circumstances that we withdrew from Afghanistan under the Biden administration. We have the ability already with this president to see the ripples of his incoming administration changing the world before he's even sworn into office. It's not just happening with the possibility of Ukraine, not just happening with the possibility of hostages coming back from Hamas. We've already seen caravans coming through Mexico being turned around because Donald Trump has told the president of Mexico, if you continue to let these people through, we're going to put a 25% tariff on everything you bring into the country. Hello? Done. I sit here with slack-jawed amazement at how simple the solutions to the problems that we face are if we are only willing to believe in ourselves and act as what we are, as a force for good in the world. People, when you have a president who fundamentally believes in the power of the United States as a force for good in the world, then good things happen in the world. And we're seeing that already from a man who is yet to be sworn in for his second term. And we could be facing an era that is so completely overwhelming in the evidence of peace through strength that not even the smartest progressives will be able to deny it in the future. For Steve Green and Scott Ott, I'm Bill Whittle. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time right here on Right Angle.